Okay, great. Thank, thank you everyone for joining us today. Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are joining us from. My name is Florence Mugi, and I will be your host and moderator for today's webinar. So before we start, we would like to know where everybody is joining us from. So in a while, I'll launch a Menti survey where you can be able to introduce yourself. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar today that will be lasting for 1 hour and 30 minutes. During this time, we will try to answer one guiding question, which is how can we effectively engage and incentivize farmers to scale a sustainable watershed and agricultural solutions. So therefore, what you will be hearing from today's webinar will be practical insights from field implementation, strategies for enabling farmer behavior, honest lessons and failures as well, real-world examples of farmer engagement, including private sector, strategies for scaling and replication, and ways of designing and scaling effective incentive models. So today we have an amazing set of speakers, which is Dr. Matthew Hauser, who is the senior social scientist at TNC and also assistant research professor at the University of Maryland. We also have Peter Mead, who is an agricultural project manager with TNC Tri-State in Minnesota and the Dakotas. And we have Ken Kemayo, who is the field conservation coordinator with Eldoret Iten Waterford. So I would like you to introduce yourself using the instructions on the screen. So you can scan the QR code on your screen or on the resources tab, which is at the bottom of the screen. You will see resources and you can see the Mentimeter link as well. I'm also posting it on chat. And please type in just your country on the Mentimeter link. So I'll give it 30 seconds. Please keep typing the country you are calling in from. Okay, beautiful. So I'll show you also that you can appreciate who is with us and where they are joining us from. So sharing my screen. And you can be able to see the countries that are represented today. So if you have not entered your country, please type in using the link on the chat. Great seeing all these countries represented. We are really honored to have you today and hope you will enjoy and learn from today's webinar. So we have a few housekeeping items, and I'll share my screen again. So this webinar will be delivered in English and live captioning has been enabled. So you can use that if it's helpful to you. This can be found at the bottom of your screen where there are two CCs in your Zoom menu. So the webinar will be recorded and uploaded in the Resilient Watersheds Toolbox, and a recording as well as slides from this webinar will be shared with all registrants. So please use the chat in case you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself using the Mentimeter. Use the chat to introduce yourself. And in the chat, you can type a little bit more details, your name, your organization that you're joining us from. And we will use the chat for any other general comments. So we have the Q&A button, which it can also be found at the bottom of your screen, which we encourage you to use it throughout the session for typing in your questions. So our speakers will be responding to them, and we will try to respond to as many questions as possible during the Q&A at the end. So we'll share my screen again. Sorry about that. And I hope you can be able to see it this time around. So I have already alluded to who our speakers are for today. So I won't mention them once again, but you can be able to see we will have 3 case studies presented. We'll have Chesapeake Bay region. We'll have a case study from Mississippi, both from North America, and we'll have 1 case study from Africa, that is Eldoret and Waterford. And then at the end, we will have a combined Q&A. However, please type in your questions as at any point during the webinar session, and the speakers will start answering them as soon as possible. So we'll have a feedback survey and then announcements at the end. And these announcements will include the upcoming webinars as well as some open job opportunities available. And now it's my pleasure to welcome our first speaker, Dr. Matthew Hauser. Dr. Matthew is a senior associate scientist at the Nature Conservancy Chesapeake Bay Agriculture Program, and is also an assistant research professor at the University of Maryland Center for Environmental Science, that is Horn Point Laboratory. And Matt's research examines the cross-scale factors that shape farmers' nutrient management decisions. So Matthew, I'll drop my screen so that you can be able to share your screen.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Very happy to be joining everyone today. Let me just get my slides up here. Great. So I want to start with a little bit of outline on where we're going. I'm going to talk about the Chesapeake Bay watershed and particularly the agricultural nitrogen challenge that we face here. From there, I'm going to give kind of a very high-level overview of the lessons learned that we've had through on-the-ground pilot projects about how to better change farmer behavior, or maybe I should re-say that, how to better enable farmers to adopt new conservation practices. And I'll be focusing, based on my background as a social science scientist, on the social science learnings that we have from that work. And then I want to conclude by talking about some an in-progress project that we have right now where we're trying to pilot a new type of incentive, at least for us, which is focused on what I'll call outcome-based incentives. And I'll explain that as I work through this slide deck. Okay, so let me orient you geographically. So I'm focused on the Chesapeake Bay watershed. I'm part of the Nature Conservancy's Chesapeake Bay program. We're here on the east coast of the United States, as you can see on this left picture. A little closer up image of the watershed. We're crossing 6 states. It's about 17 million acres in total, and it's an interesting watershed. I put this little red dot. I'll show you. This is where I'm coming to you from. We call it the eastern shore of Maryland. This is the Chesapeake Bay here, Atlantic Ocean here. We're fairly densely populated. We've got about 19 million people with some major cities like Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, D.C. located in the watershed, but we're also heavily agriculture. There's quite a bit of agriculture in the region. As you see here, 83,000 farms and 4 million acres of cropland. And particularly in south central Pennsylvania here, Virginia, eastern shore of Maryland and Delaware, we're pretty heavy row crop agriculture focused. So corn, soy, wheat, and there's a lot of chicken production as well, just to give you an idea of the area. So talking about our program at the Nature Conservancy, our goal broadly put is to restore a healthy Chesapeake Bay that supports biodiversity, local communities, and regional industry. And the main problem that we face essentially is too many nutrients going into the watershed. We have, like we said, a lot of development. We also have a lot of agriculture. That leads to a lot of nutrient runoff entering the bay. And so we have persistent hypoxic or dead zones in the watershed that are killing lots of fish, loss of habitat, and it's been declared by the United States Environmental Protection Agency that we need to meet essentially a goal for reducing the amount of nutrients coming into the bay to be sustainable in the area. So too many nutrients going into the bay is our main challenge. Whenever we look at what are the main nutrients that are the problem, nitrogen in particular is our major factor, driving lower water quality in the bay watershed. And agriculture is the largest source of nitrogen entering the bay. And in particular, not all types of agriculture contribute evenly. As I said, we have a lot of row crops. Row crops also use a lot of fertilizer, particularly nitrogen fertilizer. So whenever we look at kind of the main culprit contributing to degraded water quality, it's row crop agriculture in the watershed. 34% of all of the nitrogen entering the bay comes from row crops. So that's our main challenge that we're facing here. So I want to be clear, it's very possible, or certainly we feel based on quite a bit of evidence, that it's very possible to reduce nitrogen loss from row crop agriculture. There's lots of conservation practices that exist. Just to name a few, side dress application of fertilizer, putting the fertilizer closer to the crops. For instance, during this sort of early stage of emergence, this picture here is one way to reduce fertilizer loss and improve profits for farmers. Cover crops, so planting a non-cash crop during the winter, during the off season, is a way to help, and we do a very good job of that in Maryland, for instance. And then even more advanced fertilizer technologies like precision mapping, variable rate application, all of these things are ways that can help farmers win in many cases in terms of economics, but also reduce fertilizer loss into our water. The challenge that we think a lot about is that these practices are great, but they need to be used and they need to be widely used by farmers. So adoption in our case still depends on farmers' voluntary decisions. We don't have a lot of regulation in the area. So ultimately, farmers need to want and decide and feel like these are good practices for them if we want to see them on the landscape having the conservation benefits that we feel like they can have. And it's been clear that we have made progress. Farmers have changed their management practices over the last 17 years or so since there's been a major push in the Chesapeake Bay. But ultimately, a conclusion of a major report is that farmer behavior change is still too limited relative to our goals. So we need better encouragement, better ways of changing farmer behavior. There's an obvious question, if farmer behavior is too limited, why are we not seeing more progress? Why are we not seeing behavior change? One of the things that we did a couple of years ago was look at this question. We went out and worked with farmers, did a study. It's published in the Journal of Soil and Water Conservation, the title here. But we asked this question, why are we not seeing more progress? Because we wanted to kind of figure out, what do we need to do? What interventions do we need to focus on? And we came to a couple of broad conclusions. In our region, it's not a shortage of conservation engagement and policy efforts. Billions of dollars have been spent to try to encourage conservation practice adoption. Frankly, farmers are almost overwhelmed by the amount of conservation money that's flowing into the watershed. So it's not that there's not enough focus or not enough money at the moment. Nor are farmers unwilling to change. Farmers in our area really believe in promoting better water quality. They want it to be sustainable. They want to take these practices on. What we found that the real problem is that existing programs, the existing conservation efforts are not effective enough at countering the barriers to farmers' behavior change. So farmers feel like they were still facing obstacles that limited their ability to adopt these conservation practices. and that these programs that were meant to enable them to do it were not designed in a way that were really good at helping them overcome those challenges. So what's needed? What do we think is needed based on this? This is our kind of theory, our hypothesis that we work with in our program. And that's better conservation programs are needed that better enable farmer behavior change, right? We need to more effectively help farmers overcome those barriers. So what we do towards that end is we develop and pilot innovative incentive and engagement programs. We evaluate and refine them, drawing on both natural science and social science. And whenever we feel like we've got a good model, we pursue scaling mechanisms where we try to get that program at large, durably funded, and can reach as many farmers as possible. So we've run a lot of programs with variable focus since 2021. Some of these are still going, some of these have ended. We've done our planning voucher. I won't give a lot of detail here, but we've done things like flexible $1,000 upfront payments for kind of any precision nutrient management practice you want to try. We've offered yield warranties where if you adopt a particular practice and are concerned about yield loss, we'll cover that if it happens. So it's essentially a type of insurance for focused on conservation practices. We're testing, as I will get to in more detail, outcome-based payments. And we're doing some innovative technology that combines a number of these incentive programs, but also pushes out new ways for farmers to map and understand the impact of cover crops and nutrients on their land. I just want to give a broad overview here. What I want to transition to and spend a little bit more time is we've evaluated the impact of all of these different programs, and I'll give you a quick summary of the key themes that we've learned of what helps farmers in our region in terms of an intervention or incentive program change their behavior. One thing that we've concluded through all of our work, and this is quite a bit of empirical data that we've collected, is that financial incentives, even small ones, are encouraging practice adoption that wouldn't have occurred otherwise. So many farmers are telling us that because we offered some type of money, it might even be, in our case, $1,000, which is not much given the capital concerns in our region, that matters to them. It reduces capital barriers, even in a small way, that otherwise would limit their adoption or their trial of particular services or practices. But it also helps with social barriers, right? Farmers face a lot of social challenges to adoption. One of the things we see in our region is a lot of intergenerational management, where an older parent and a younger child are co-managing a farm and there can be tensions. And I'll give you a sense these financial incentives can help overcome that. To quote one of the farmers that we worked with, conservation management stuff doesn't really interest dad because he never did it. I've been kind of throwing it around, and then my advisor mentioned the Nature Conservancy program, and I was like, hey, here's a good time to see once what we think of it, right? So this financial incentive helped this farmer overcome some of that social challenge of intergenerational management differences, enabled him to encourage his dad, like, hey, let's give this a shot. What do we have to lose? They're helping us pay for it. So these financial incentives really matter. The other thing we found is that private sector fertilizer dealers and agronomists are key trusted sources to deliver conservation programs. Conservation sources like soil and water conservation districts, university extension, they're great, but they don't quite have the same level of trust and connection with the farmers as the private sector folks do. So these folks have an existing relationship. They know the farmers well. They're out there. They've got a lot of the data. All of those things help whenever it comes to actually having them deliver conservation programs for us. But it also reduces the enrollment burden. Farmers don't like paperwork. They don't like bureaucracy. And these private sector folks will take on a lot of that work, making it easier to try a program. Another thing we've seen is that flexible and adaptable incentive packages are critical to reaching a diverse mix of farmers. A lot of programs pay farmers for a particular practice. So for instance, we have a very popular program here that pays farmers to adopt cover crops. That's great if you want a farmer to try cover crops. But if a farmer already has cover crops, or if a farmer's tried cover crops and doesn't like it, that program won't work for them. So we've found giving farmers incentives that enable them to try different things that work for their farm, but fit within our scope of vision, that allow them to make the choice, really work well and can enable a broad range of farmers, regardless of where they're at and the adoption curve, if you will, to try new things. The other thing we found is that whenever farmers try practices that they think work for their farm financially, those practices are more likely to stick around after the incentive money ends. So we think flexible and adaptive incentive packages are really helpful for promoting persistence or durability of a practice. The last highlight, the last theme I'll share from across our work is that adopted conservation practices are not always leading to less environmental impact. Not because there's something wrong with the technology, it's because of the way in which farmers are actually using these practices on their farm. So let me unpack that a little bit more, give you a quick example. A very popular conservation practice that's kind of new to the area is what people call biologicals here. You can put this with your crop, and the idea is that it can help reduce your fertilizer needs, unlocking the biological capacity of the soil to provide those nutrients. So we tried a program where we helped farmers adopt these through a yield warranty. And our expectation was that farmers would use biologicals to reduce nitrogen fertilizer rates while maintaining yield. The goal was these biologicals could help them reduce fertilizer rate by about 20 pounds. And if you reduce fertilizer rate, you're usually reducing environmental impact pretty significantly. So we thought that that's what we were going to get out of this. And that's why we did a yield warranty program to promote it. But whenever we evaluated this work and we talked to farmers, what we found is that most farmers were using these biologicals to increase yield while maintaining nitrogen rates. There's still a conservation benefit here. It increases efficiency, but it's much smaller than if they would have actually reduced nitrogen fertilizer rates. So what we found is that this conservation practice was not leading to the environmental outcomes that we thought it would. And this has been consistently repeated in a lot of the studies that I've done throughout my time. Why is this happening? Well, profit is more determined by corn yield than by nitrogen costs. Corn yield's worth a lot more, in other words, than the cost of additional nitrogen. So to put that in other words, what we face is that farmers are incentivized to use new practices, conservation or otherwise, to pursue more yield rather than to conserve fertilizer. And often that means that practices are used in a way that minimize or at the very least limit their ability to fully provide conservation benefits. So what are the implications of what I'm saying for better incentive programs? Creating the conditions for adoption is needed. I do think we need to help farmers adopt these new practices given financial, social barriers. But maximizing the impact of conservation practices may depend on incentives that shape how those practices are used, not just if they're used. And right now, we're actually testing that idea. As I mentioned, this idea of an outcome-based payment program. We're using this to see if we can shape not just if farmers adopt a practice, but if they can use it in a way that maximizes its impact. So we're doing this through a USDA Conservation Innovation Grant. We're providing farmers in this program upfront incentives to support adoption, a very small $1,000, like I said, flexible thing that can be used for helping their private sector advisor provide advice, new data, trying a new service, etc. It's up to them. We leave it flexible, but covering some type of conservation practice adoption. But we're also providing what we call an outcome payment to encourage conservation impact. In other words, we're focusing on the impact of that conservation practice and paying based on the outcomes that we'd like to see. So we're using what's called nitrogen use efficiency, or NUE. This is a measure of how much fertilizer gets captured in the crop, and it's considered a very robust indicator of the sustainability, essentially, of that management system, whether it be a field, an acre, or a watershed. And so if we see better nitrogen use efficiency, we see more sustainable use. So we're trying to encourage that by paying based on the level of efficiency achieved. And just to give you an idea, for instance, if farmers in our program achieve 90% or more efficiency, we'll pay them $50 an acre for that. So we're hoping that this can affect the way in which these conservation practices are being used to maximize their impact. And one of the things that's exciting to me about this work and about outcome-based programs in general is there's a lot of supply chain potential. NUE is already a widespread, robust indicator of sustainable production. People like it. The data is relatively easy to collect on it. Farmers understand it intuitively. And so we're really excited about the potential to put this into some type of market premium system where farmers can be rewarded in the supply chain durably for this conservation impact. So it's not just dependent on the next grant, the next grant. And I can't talk about it in detail in any way, but we're in the process of working with a large scale supplier at the moment who's become very interested in this idea. And so we're developing some plans to build out a pilot with them towards kind of, again, durable scaling of this outcome payment. Okay, I'm wrapping up. Let me summarize my points. In the Chesapeake Bay watershed, making progress on row crop farmer behavior change depends on better incentive engagement approaches. Achieving this depends, I think, on doing and evaluating real-world pilots. Very few people in the US are actually doing on-the-ground work and systematic social and natural science evaluation of it. And I think it's a rare thing that TNC is working in right now. I would also say you cannot ignore the role of the agricultural economy in shaping how adopted practices are used, right? And I'm hopeful through this work that outcome incentives may actually help promote more effective use of these practices, and that there's an opportunity to support scaling and widespread change across the agro-food system through market integration. So I'll end by acknowledging the funders and the people who I've collaborated with on this work, and thank you all for listening.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Matthew, for that great presentation. It's really interesting perspective. And now we will be hearing from the Kenya side of things. So just to apologize to all those attending, one of our speakers, Peter, have had a family medical emergency, so he'll not be able to join us this morning, this evening, for this webinar. However, we hope we will be able to share this case at some other point in time. Then with that, we hope to end maybe a bit earlier and save you 30 minutes from the webinar. So we might run this webinar for 1 hour. So it is now my pleasure to welcome our second speaker, who is Ken. Ken is a community development champion with over 10 years of experience in environmental conservation, climate change, and community empowerment. He is the field conservation coordinator of the Eldoret Iten Waterford, working across the Uasin Gishu and Elgeyo Marakwet watersheds to promote sustainable resources management. He is also an alumni of the Political Leadership and Governance Program that the Friedrich Ebert Staffan, little difficult for my tongue, and a graduate in environmental science from Kenyatta University. He envisions a society transformed through knowledge, justice, and sustainable development. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Florence, and greetings to everyone. I'll be sharing my screen as I do this presentation. I hope, Florence, I'm audible enough. I can
Yes, we
proceed.
can. We can hear you.
Thank you very much. I'll be delving into the catchment restoration through smallholder-led interventions and incentive-driven approaches for the Eldoret Iten Water Fund, which is a private public partnership project in Kenya. It is one of the
Sorry, Ken.
Yes.
Just a minute. Are you able to make that in the presentation mode?
Yes, is that great?
Perfect. Yes. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Flo. So saying that Eldoret Iten Water Fund is one of the 17 water funds in Africa, which operates in the watershed of Eldoret and Iten, which is in Uasin Gishu and Elgeyo Marakwet County, and particularly have been in charge of conservation activities within the watershed. So my presentation will, I'll be able to talk about the background of Eldoret Iten Water Fund, what are the goals and objectives of our water fund. I'll also be talking about the sustainable land management practices and how we are able to track our outcomes and the impact. Then the lessons learned, which will be on the successes and the challenges that we've experienced as we implement our project here. So as I said earlier, that this is one of the 17 water funds in Africa, and it adopts the model where the downstream users, who are the contributors, who are the people at the top, make contributions to an endowment fund, where at the endowment fund with a governance board, then activities are generated from the landowners or the upstream community for activities that aim to improve on the quality of the water and the quantity of the water as well. So it is basically from the top to the top in a very simple language, where we are able to combine the efforts of both the downstream users at the top, who include the water utility companies, both in Eldoret and Iten, as well as industrial users and other users of water downstream, so that they can contribute to the protection of the watershed at the upstream. So that is the main aim, is to harness now the nature's ability to capture, filter, store, and deliver clean and reliable water to the residents of both Uasin Gishu and Elgeyo Marakwet counties. So just a short background, Eldoret is Kenya's 5th largest city, with a population of close to 500,000. And also Iten is also another municipality with a population of close to 200,000. And these communities or these cities is already a water scarce city. We are experiencing water crisis, and the water crisis deepens each and every year with a growing population in the urban areas and the degradation of the watersheds. So this region as well is also one of Kenya's key agricultural breadbasket, where as a community we produce a lot of grains, potatoes, and other food crops that feed the country. So the critical water sources within the watershed include the Cherangani Hills, the Elgeyo Hills, and the North Mau Forest, covering over 120,000 hectares. So this watershed supports the small-scale farming, the water supply to these cities, as well as biodiversities, and for that matter, the critical ecosystems which provide habitat to some of the threatened species of flora and fauna found in these water catchments. So we are already experiencing a lot of pressures in this watershed, which include deforestation, both legal and illegal deforestation, where in the forest areas we have a lot of logging. We also have intensive upland farming in the watershed, where farmers are getting into with the wetlands and catchment areas to get land to do crop production. So therefore, unsustainably, they are using the lands to produce food crops. And also with the increasing population, there's also huge demand for land for cultivation. And therefore, there's a lot of pressure on the uplands. So Eldoret Iten Water Fund has come in to tackle the issues of forests and land degradation through farmer-led conservation activities. We've come together with the members of the community to tackle these issues and to reverse and to restore the lands in the upstream. So our goal is to restore the watersheds, to improve the water security, improve livelihoods, also enhance biodiversity and resilience of the people, and also the ecosystem. So our focus areas are 5 catchments, which I already mentioned before. So one of the things that we are working with smallholder farmers is conserving soil and water through good agricultural practices, agroforestry, riparian and wetlands restoration. And one of the approaches that we use is on agricultural extension, where extension is the practice of transferring agricultural technology and knowledge to farmers through different ways. So we transfer this knowledge using one of the models, which is training and visit system of extension, where with a pool of trained extension officers and technical assistants, we are able to visit farmers in their farms and do what we call a farm-specific action plan, where the slopes of the land is measured and recommendations of different interventions are drawn on a sketch, which you can see from the right picture. That's a sketch where the farmer, we have details of the farmer, the sketch map indicating the recommendations or the interventions that are recommended in that farmland, and based on the slope of the land, the recommendation on whether we need to have terracing, the kind of practices that need to be implemented on that farm, and the farmer, together with the extension assistant, signs that that farm plan as a way of committing to implementing the interventions that are recommended, as well as helping Eldoret Iten Water Fund to make follow-ups in those farms to ensure that whatever was recommended is fully implemented. So this way, we are able to visit, we've been able to visit close to 43,000 farmers within the watershed, and all of these farmers have the farm-specific action plan with all the required interventions and the recommendations to ensure that that land is sustainably utilized. We also have another approach of the group-based extension model, where within the watershed, we group our farmers within a locality. Either this could be a village, a location, or a sub-location. And these farmers average between 50 and 100 farmers, where they are able to select or to elect one of their own to be the farmer representative. And periodically, we organize extension trainings where the farmers are grouped together. They are able to learn from one another, and they are given extension knowledge by our extension assistants together with the ward agricultural officers from the county governments of both Elgeyo and Uasin Gishu. So in this model is very good because it helps on peer-to-peer learning. And also once farm products are good, then they can be able to benefit from the economies of scale as they do their marketing for their farm produce. So this is the second model of extension that we offer. The third model of extension is on the technology-based short message service, where all our farmers who have been visited and trained by our extension assistants are able to get advisories on sustainable land management, pest management, weather and market-related information through a short messaging service, and it is free of charge, and therefore the farmers are able to get informational messages, also promotional messages, as well as market-based information. So while we are doing our extension, we have and are doing the farm plan. To sustainably manage our soils, we train on contour farming, where the slopes of between 2% and around 12%, between 2% and 12%, we advise our farmers to do contour farming, which controls erosion and also helps in water retention. And these are not very slopy lands, where we encourage farmers to do contour farming. Then after harvest of crops, we always encourage our farmers to maintain a continuous layer of crop residue, which is left on the ground to help in the soil structure as well. Then the other thing that we train our farmers on is on crop rotation, which helps to improve on the soil structure. And now our major focus is on the terracing, because our land's slope is over 12%, where the preference is highly encouraged for the bench terraces. And the bench terraces is where, after measuring the slope to be over 12%, we encourage our farmers to dig a channel of 2 feet wide and 2 feet deep, and the soil is thrown uphill. And in this case, the soil is compacted uphill, and also it is stabilized by use of the Super Napier grass, which is both a good, which has good root system, which will help in retaining the soil and conserving moisture, as well as also a very good, it provides a very high nutritious content for our livestock. So it serves both livestock as well as the soil conservation. Where the lands are not so slopey, we encourage the use of grass strips, which in farms which are mechanized, then they are unplowed, and also grass is planted to stabilize those strips. And as I mentioned earlier, and you can look at the picture there, that is a drone image of one of the farms, which already has a farm-specific action plan, and already terraces have been done, and the farm is well managed. So that is what we encourage our farmers to do, and that's just a sample of the farms that we have in our watershed. So the other thing that we promote is agroforestry, which is a land use management system that combines woody vegetation with agricultural production. And we have several designs that we encourage our farmers as they implement agroforestry. And there are a number of crops, or a number of fruit trees that we encourage our farmers to plant as a way of promoting agroforestry. And these include the avocado, as well as the macadamia fruit trees, and then we have the Grevillea trees. So for avocado, we majorly encourage our farmers to do orchards where they secure a piece of land and they plant the avocado trees. Then we encourage boundary planting on the farm edges, and for this we encourage the Grevillea tree, which is a good agroforestry tree, which helps in soil fertilization and does not affect the land. So those are the things that we encourage in agroforestry. And as I mentioned, we use a lot of visual training materials, including posters that show the different models of agroforestry that we encourage our farmers to implement in the land. From the drone imagery as one of the ways of measuring outcome and impact, the first photo there is how our farmers utilize the very slopey land in the Cherangani Hills. And if things are left the way they were, then we are losing the watershed on a very high rate. And therefore, our interventions take us to the second picture, where we encourage such farmers to implement the sustainable land and management practices as they do their farming. And the third picture there is on how we are encouraging our farmers not to farm up to the riverbank. The fourth one here is a water conservation measure where we have three models of water pans, where our farmers harvest when we have adequate rain. Farmers harvest the water in the water pans in different capacities of between 25,000 liters and 100,000 liters. And the farmers are able to utilize this water during the dry season to irrigate their crops. So it is, and of course, based on the slopiness of the area, we collect the water, especially that would have gone to waste through runoff, and the farmers are able to utilize this water. In essence, it reduces the pressure that our households upstream would be going to the downstream. It would be going to the river to fetch water, because they will be having available water within their farmlands through these water pans. We are also encouraging on the fifth photo there. We are encouraging riparian and wetland conservation, and we are also using our drone. We are using, especially using the 16 trained locally youth on drone technology. We are able to monitor the biodiversity within this watershed. So we have a dashboard where we measure the results, because all our interventions are recorded using the Kobo, and it is in the dashboard of Eldoret Iten Water Fund, showing us the trees that we have planted by watershed, the number of beneficiaries by watershed, the land area that is conserved in terms of hectares, and the farmer categories, whether they are young people or old people. And we already have results, especially in terms of the beneficiary outreaches, the grass strips that have been planted, the terraces that have been excavated, the trees planted, the riparian conserved, all this geared towards an healthier and more resilient ecosystem that supports food production and downstream water flows for the cities of Eldoret and Iten. And these are our watersheds, and it is showing us where we've been able to develop farm plans within the watershed by a click of a button, and we are able to record all the details of all our farmers for easy follow-up and also tracking the outcomes. So what drives the farmer uptake of the sustainable land management practices? The first thing that drives this farmer uptake, one, is securing the free, prior, and informed consent by the farmers so that we have ownership of our sustainable land management practices. We have different communities within the watershed, and some of these communities are marginalized indigenous communities, and therefore we ensure that before we implemented our activities, we secured a free, prior, and informed consent from the farmers. And after the farmers sign the free, prior, and informed consent, they also sign the farm specific action plan for us to engage. So once they are well informed and they've already committed, then it is easier to implement our activities. And number two is on the continuous extension support that we offer to our farmers. We realize that one-off extension may not be enough, and therefore we do continuous extension. After we have the farm-specific action plan, then we do follow-ups. We also follow up through the short messaging services, the SMS, informing farmers of what they need to do, and also inquiring from them the status that they are. Then the other one is on group methods, where the peer-to-peer learning helps to drive the uptake of sustainable land management practices. And we also do exchange visits through the groups from different places in the watershed where they are adopting the SLM well. Then we have farmers also doing exchange programs. Then we supply inputs to farmers who have adopted the sustainable land management practices. For our farmers who have done the excavation of the terraces, then we supply to them the super Napier for them to stabilize those terraces. So it is a win-win situation for all of us, because the farmers, once they contribute in excavating and also giving us the authority or the permission to offer extension subsidy in their land, then we offer them materials to support the sustainable land management practices. And the support in terms of materials include the super napier for stabilizing the terraces and also doing the grass strips. We offer the avocado and macadamia, which are the fruit trees. And these are high value crops that our farmers really value. And therefore, when we supply these inputs to our farmers, the farmers are able to adopt the SLM, and there is huge demand for these materials. The fourth thing that we do to drive the farmer uptake is on promoting of the farmer groups. As Eldoret Iten Water Fund, to ensure that we implement the landscape approach where we do not leave any farmer behind, we encourage and we form farmer groups within a locality, and therefore they are able to benefit. There is always a huge benefit when it comes to groups. The other thing that drives farmer uptake is on the collaborative collaboration between the county governments as well as the Eldoret Iten Water Fund and other partners. So the county governments have a mandate to improve and promote agriculture and have staff within the wards. And therefore, when we collaborate with these ward agricultural officers, they're able to offer additional services that encourage our farmers to undertake sustainable land management practices. So we are also encouraging on the high yield practices like which I mentioned earlier, the fast maturing super napier grass, which has over 18% crude protein content, and we have a lot of improved income from the production of our animals in our farms. So scaling these high yield practices helps in driving the uptake of the sustainable land management practices. As I wind up, some of the challenges that that we've encountered as we implement our activities, which slows the uptake of the sustainable land management practices. The first one is on the intensive farming practices, where most of our farmers are doing the annual crops, which require heavy tillage, and these include the potatoes, which are 3 months, and they really degrade our land because this intensive farming requires a lot of heavy tillage, as well as the use of chemicals in the farmland. So this is one of the things and that's why we are encouraging more perennial crops, high value fruit trees that include the avocado and macadamia. Then the second challenge that we face in our lands is on short-term land leasing, where as we go as extension officers to farms, the landlords are always absent, and therefore we only find individuals who are focused on maximizing crop production in that land, and therefore this also limits the adoption of the land sustainable land management practices. The other thing is on high illiteracy levels in our communities. Some of our community members, including the indigenous people within this watershed, because uniquely, Eldoret Iten Water Fund works in an area where we have 3 indigenous communities. Those are the Ogiek, the Sengwer, and the Cherangani, whose levels of literacy are very low. And therefore, the adoption of sustainable land management practices in these communities with high literacy levels is always very challenging. The other thing is on weak policies and extension systems that while we are encouraging and we are benefiting from the collaboration by the county governments, there is a weak policy in terms of extension in Kenya now is demand driven, where as a farmer, if you require extension services, then you will have to demand for it and pay for it as well. And therefore, this has weakened the extension services because farmers may not have the ability to pay for extension. But our extension as Eldoret Iten Water Fund is supply driven, where we are the ones who are going directly to the farmers to offer extension services. So such weak policies and also budgetary constraint is a challenge as we implement the sustainable land practices. Finally, we have some of the climate extremes as a result of degradation of our land, as a result of the topography, as a result of climate change. We periodically experience flash floods. We also experience droughts. We also experience unreliable rainfall or erratic rainfall patterns. And these climate extremes increase the vulnerability of the households that we work in the watershed. So these challenges hinder the adoption of the sustainable land management practices within the Eldoret Iten Water Fund. Thank you. That marks the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken, for the great presentation. Indeed, a different perspective and incentive from what Matthew had shared. So these are two very different incentives to encourage sustainable land management practices for watershed conservation. So Matthew and Ken will be going to the Q&A. I see there is a question for Ken. Where Sitaram asked about the trees that are planted on the boundaries in the fields for shade purposes generally reduce crop yield. It is experienced here by many of the farmers, and they, do you face such types of issues? So basically, Sitaram is asking about the cropping system you described, where farmers are using some of the indigenous trees in the boundaries of their farms, whether these affect their crop yields and whether you have faced any challenges with farmers taking up those interventions.
Yes, thank you for that question. For the different agroforestry designs, their adoption are quite different. Particularly for boundary type, we encourage the use of gravelia trees, which do not bring about conflicts with farmers. So some other types of trees are not good for boundary planting, but they are good for areas within the farmland, and we encourage the dispersed method of planting. Otherwise, for boundaries, we encourage the gravelia as well as other leguminous plants that are used as feed for livestock, including the lucina as well as tree lucerne, which are encouraged for boundaries, and these do not bring about conflicts. Other trees that may bring conflicts, we encourage to use other means, including the dispersed, including alley and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken. We have a question where you both can answer, but you can start with Matthew on the long-term sustainability plan.
Yeah, I mean, I think for our work, we do want to be clear, we do restoration work and edge of field work, like Kenneth was talking about, but the focus of the presentation I gave there was more on interventions that are technical in nature within the row crop system, right? This is new equipment, new data, new ways of managing. And in that body of our work, the kind of long-term, how do I want to put it? The question that we have is ultimately these things aren't structural. It's a little different than planting a tree in the sense that a farmer can variable rate their fertilizer, or you side dress their fertilizer one year and the next year decide not to. So the constant question that we have in terms of long-term sustainability is durability, by which we mean, is there persistence to farmer behavior here? I actually think at least in the US, in larger scale row crop systems, we don't know a whole lot about if a farmer is incentivized to adopt a new practice, how long do they continue to do that once the incentives end? This is a relatively new body of research. Some of the work with cover crops, particularly in the Midwest, where Peter works more, is showing that there's quite a bit of abandonment. I would say to get to the point of this question, our long-term focus in our work is to better understand that durability of our incentives and the practices that farmers adopt within this technological space, and to figure out what's the structure that best encourages long-term durability. As I said during the presentation, we are finding that this very flexible incentive program where we allow farmers to adopt the conservation practice that works for them, that their advisor recommends, that they feel like will be profitable. We have preliminary evidence that that's durable because farmers see profitability and so they continue to do it. But that's something that we're thinking a lot about. And the other part, briefly, is just that, as I said, we're looking to move right now. A lot of our funding is in annual packages. You know, it's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years of funding. And we think ultimately in the row crop space in the US, there needs to be some type of premium attached to some of these practices if we want to see consistent conservation delivered within the fertilizer management space. So the other thing we're always kind of pushing is how can we get private sector, let's say commodity or food companies, to build that into what they're paying farmers for some type of, sustainability achievement. And we think I don't want to put it, I don't want to claim we have the solution found, but we think we're walking down the right path with the outcome-based payment and the nitrogen use efficiency. Kenneth, turn it over to you.
Thank you. I will answer that in three steps that we are doing as the Eldoret Iten Water Fund to ensure sustainability. And one of them is setting up an endowment fund where we have contributors contributing to the endowment fund, which will be able to, in terms of resources, to be able to support the work going forward. The second thing is having a pool of trained extension assistants where we are working with the local youth, so that as they graduate, as they get older, we already have a pool of trained individuals who continuously engage the farmers. The other thing is to have a complete value chain development for the things that we encourage on the high value fruit trees. And once we have the complete value chain, then our farmers this can be very profitable to our farmers, and this will ensure sustainability. And the last thing that we are working on to ensure that we have resources to support this work is to encourage the water utility companies to set up a tariff that will go into conservation activities upstream. Thank you.
Thank you, Ken and Matthew, for those great answers. Ken, I see a question that sort of like follows what you have mentioned about funding mechanisms. And the question is, what type of funding mechanisms were implemented to make this possible? You have alluded to what long-term sustainability looks like, but what kind of funding did you start up with?
Yes, thank you. As I mentioned in the introductory part, that the fund is a public-private partnership initiative by the government of Kenya, as well as private partners, and the Nature Conservancy was very critical in securing resources for the initial start of the activities, and this has enabled us. This was the seed capital that enabled us implement our activities as we sourced for other private contributions that feed into the endowment fund. Thank you.
Amazing. Matthew, would you like to respond to the same question?
Yeah, our funding, we draw from a lot of really diverse sources. A lot of it has been various types of federal funding in the U.S. Um, National Fish and Wildlife Fund, Environmental Protection Agency, and recently a lot of our funding has come from the United States Department of Agriculture, where we go after pots of money that have a mix of implementation funds, farm money that goes out to farmers or gets stuff on the ground, and that we can draw salary and other resources from to be able to evaluate that work, because we think that's such an important part of our theory. But we've worked with the private sector. We do a lot of private partnerships. Yeah, we go after a real diverse range of funding, but I want to be clear, and as I've said, our vision is not that we will always, for every project, every idea, just be seeking the next grant, or whatever. We view those grants as a way to develop and test ideas, refine an understanding of the best way to promote behavior change, and ultimately we want to push that learning out to other partners, if you will, into federal or state policy, into the hands of corporate food companies, et cetera, that are often looking for these answers but don't have them. So it's the long-term vision with all of that work.
Amazing. Thank you, Matthew. As a follow-on, there is also a question about the nitrogen evaluation efficiency, and would it be sustainable without the evaluation?
Yeah, I might need this question clarified as I answer it. I'm a little unclear on the exact intent here, but I don't have a cost estimate for evaluation of that specifically off the top of my head. I mean, I will say it's a significant part of our project budget at the moment. That total project is a little above $2 million, and aims to engage 20 farmers for about 100,000 acres of impact. And a good amount of that is going towards evaluation, but that's because, as I said, I don't want to say it's a brand new idea by any means, but it hasn't been tested in the way that we're trying to test it. And so we've got quite a bit of on the ground field trials where we're really trying to document changes in efficiency as a result of the practices we're putting on the ground. So we can learn to refine the outcome measurement, but also so farmers have a baseline and understanding of how, whenever they try something new, it impacts their efficiency and the way that we're calculating it. And we want to have a really good understanding of those outcomes. So once we're done with the project and we're in a position to push it to scale, we feel really confident that we can make particular claims about, X change in efficiency leads to Y water quality benefits, for instance. Of course, the other component of it is the social evaluation, using social science to understand what elements of the project worked and didn't. So we think all of that's incredibly, to be clear, necessary to feel like we have a good product at the end of the day that moves out the door, and that, if you will, that it's leading to sustainable impact. So feel free, forgive me, I'm not seeing who asked that question now, but feel free to follow up if I've mistaken it by any means.
Amazing. Thank you, Matthew. So, Alan, how do farmers raise the amount that get to the endowment fund, since conservation efforts might not give instant increased incomes?
Okay. Some of the interventions and the incentives that are provided to farmers, which include on issues of water conservation, that are the water funds. The water fund itself subsidizes the cost of the liners by 80%, and the farmer contribution would be the 20%, which go into the endowment fund. So in that case, the farmers are contributing to the endowment fund using by getting the benefits of these incentives at a subsidized cost by the fund, and therefore they are contributing to the fund.
Amazing. Thank you, Ken. So the other question is on how the ecological benefits are being evaluated. Matthew, I don't know whether you would like to go first and then Ken.
Yeah, let me start by saying I'm not the primary person to ask about this. I can represent the views, but I'll just note that my colleague Dr. Kristen Fisher has a soil science background. She leads a lot of this work, and whenever it comes to the ecological benefits, she's the primary one designing those studies. My background is environmental sociology, so I'm more on the social end, but with that caveat noted. Um, for the nitrogen use efficiency trials, and one of our other projects, I'll put it that way to keep it brief. We have field trials built in, right, where we're actually working with farmers. We're putting in strips and we're, essentially varying fertilizer rates or varying practice types. And at the end of the year, using yield data, matching it with our input data and looking at outcomes in a very structured way is the way I would get at it. Other programs that we don't feel like that is warranted, where we have better information, we don't need as much on the ground kind of field testing. We're more focused on farmers' reported management shifts. So that's much easier to collect. We work, like I said, a lot with the private sector, many of the folks who are managing farmers' inputs. And so, in partnership and with clear transparency to our farmers, we're getting a lot of that management data. And our primary focus is on essentially are the practices that we've paid for or helped cover the cost of through our incentive programs. How is that impacting the rate of nitrogen fertilizer that farmers are using on the acres that we paid for it? Because generally, there's two things that matter. The efficiency of fertilizer use, so how much fertilizer is getting captured in the crop, which is just yield divided by inputs, and total input. So we look at those two factors, which again are easy to collect, and we see are these having the outcomes that we would expect. And as I showed with the biological example, sometimes that's not the case. Again, still leading to a beneficial impact, but we always try to check, are we seeing the outcomes that we expect?
Uh, for us as a water fund, we use a scientific framework known as the biological condition gradient, which describes the change of the habitats in relation to the human-induced stressors, and therefore we can be able to measure this through the biological condition gradient.
Amazing. Thank you, Matt and Ken. Not sure I understand the other question. Samson, maybe you can clarify what you mean by can farmers pay back finances given to them? Matthew, I don't know whether there is such an instance or maybe Samson needs to clarify.
We
Okay.
don't, yeah, we've never designed a program where we've asked farmers to pay back what's given to them. I'll 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 answer this briefly, but one point I would make is like one of our working assumptions is given the way that the commodity crop market works in the United States and frankly much of the world, farmers basically are just paid for how much yield they get. And so often there's not any incentive economically, or at the very least, there's significant risk for them to try some of these new conservation practices because there's no way to build that benefit and the risks that come with trying something new into their crop prices. They're given the same, dollars, for instance, for bushels of corn as somebody that's not using those conservation practices. So we don't view it as a loan or something like that. Like we view it as an enabling condition that's not built into the system right now because we need to mitigate risk and we also need to increase rewards for conservation. And again, our hope is in the long term by proving the effectiveness of that's something that can be built into the system. The private sector, there is concerns, if you will. In many cases, they're incentivized to sell more fertilizer. We work with really great partners And they're thinking really hard about how to transition their business model where more of their profitability is based on conservation services rather than just selling more fertilizer. But I'll say there's bumps in that road. That's something they're trying to figure out. But it's been a challenge at times for them. They tend to profit off of selling these conservation services to farmers, helping them become more efficient. But figuring out the model, right, is something that we're working together with them and learning from one another about how to actually achieve. I'm guessing at the second part of the question, but that would be my answer for it.
Thank you, Matt and Ken. Ken, I don't know whether there has been such a case for you.
Well, just as Matthew has indicated, we do not expect farmers to pay back for whatever we implemented, because our major goal is to have a healthier and more resilient ecosystem. And when downstream users contribute towards the restoration of the upstream, the payment that we can expect from farmers is to implement these practices, which will in turn ensure that we have quality and adequate water flowing downstream. So that would be the form of payment that we expect from our farmers. But essentially, paying back is not part of the question.
Amazing. I expected as much. Thank you so much to our amazing speakers who have done a great job at both presenting and also answering our questions for the first time. We have cleared all the Q&A. So thank you, everybody, and thank you to the attendees for making it up to the end of the session. I know I had promised to end at the top of the hour. However, I thought the Q&A would be important session and everybody would be interested to stay, which proved right. So we would like feedback on the webinar session, whether you would like more cases like these in the future webinar topics. So there is a Menti, another Menti, it's for you to give us some feedback. I'll also share my screen so that you can use the QR code in case you would be interested in more cases on this topic. So please, you can scan, you can scan the QR code or access the Menti via the resources button at the bottom of your screen. So I'll give it another 30 seconds. Amazing. So you can respond to all the questions in the Menti. There are several of them. So the first one is, to what
Just
extent
brief.
did the...
They're asking
Yes.
for us to wait for the presenter to change slides. So I think you need to advance to the next question and then we'll be able to answer it.
Oh, amazing. Okay. Okay. Did that work? Thank you, Brooke. So the other question is whether you would like to hear more case studies on this topic in the future. So to hear more case examples in the same topic. I know it's the first time we are hosting a webinar on soils and how the relationship between what is done on the farm affect what happens downstream in terms of water quality and quantity. So let us know if you would like to hear more case studies on these. You can use the phone and you can be able to see the QR code on the screen. And we will keep this link open. So in case you have more responses, or you can just write back to us on also any future topic that you would like us to explore. Okay. So with that, we have come to the end of the session. We just have a few announcements to make. One is on the amazing article by the former US Senator Bill on the Greater Cape Town Performance Board. If you haven't had a chance to read any of the articles or information about the performance board, this is your chance. I'll also share these links, but they are also under the resources tab on Zoom. We also have two webinars coming up on financing drought webinar on the 10th and the inland waters management webinar that will be both in Spanish and English in June 9th. So those are two upcoming webinars. Please register via the links on the resources, or once I share the master slide deck where you can be able to see the links. On the last announcement is we have some job openings on the partnership, and the numbering is wrong, partnership advisor, water and resilience. So there is links also on the resources tab that you can use in case you're interested or you would like to share it with your partners and colleagues or anyone who might be interested in these opportunities. We have referenced these throughout the webinar, so our Resilient Watersheds toolbox is a good place to go when you need more resources on this topic and other resources when it comes to watershed investment programs as well as waterfalls implementation. And someone had also asked about the cases, whether they'll be shared. So just to announce that we'll have the Eldoret 10 Waterford case sent out next week in our newsletter. So be on the lookout and you can read more about what Ken has been talking about and how the process has been of establishing the Waterford and implementing it. So these are some of the ways that you can be able to stay up to date with our network. One is, if you're not already a member, please sign up. The link is on the resources tab, but you can also scan the QR code. You can also visit the Resilient Watersheds toolbox that I have already mentioned. And in there, you will also be able to see the previous webinars as well as newsletters. If you scroll down through the network section of the toolbox, you'll be able to access that. And our main newsletter will be going out next week. So you can be on the lookout for that. With that, thank you so much for attending this webinar. We really appreciate your presence. Hopefully you have a great weekend, and we hope to see you in our next webinar next quarter. Thank you for staying up to the end. Have a great day, have a great evening, have a great afternoon. Bye, everybody.